Hey guys, Robin here, and welcome to another movie review. Yes, it is October, a bit late into October than I'd like to from the review, but anyways, I'd like to discuss something. Now we all know what a remake is, right? It is a it is a movie that is retelling a story with the same characters as a pre-existing film. And back in the 19 and back in the 80s, there was a trend of taking 50 sci-fi films and remaking them as sci-fi horror films. So we got so such movies as the Thing by Howard Hawks from 1951 got a remake in 1982 by the great John Carpenter. 1957's The Fly with Vincent Price. 1957's The Fly with Vincent Price and Herbert Marshall. Directed by written by written by James Clavell, and produced and directed by Kurt Newman, the same guy that made Rocket Ship XM, which in itself was a ripoff of Destination Moon. How even with The Fly got a remake in '86, starring Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, and was directed by the legendary David Cronenberg, who directed my second favorite Canadian film of all time, Shivers. And now Invaders from Mars from '53 also got a remake, but unlike the previous two, its remake didn't throw horror in. It was just remade as a standard sci-fi film. But this movie is incredible, and I have reviewed this movie before. So yeah, Invaders from Mars, it got an '80s remake, but wasn't a horror movie. But the 1958 Steve McQueen classic, The Blob, The Blob got a horror remake in 1988, which is what I have for you today. Now, now I can't really talk much about like the film's writing and what kind of changes they've made because well, I mean, it's almost impossible. This it's hard to talk about this film's like writing and such, but without bringing spoilers, but I'll try. So the remake of the Blob again concerns the Blob coming to Earth in a meteor and attacking a small town. Now, like in the original film, the Blob's first victim is a homeless guy, and and so for characters we have Paul, who is a football player who who acts out this girl Meg, played by Shawnee Smith, and Shawnee Smith is incredible in this film. It also stars Kevin Dillon as Brian Flagg, who's the local who's the local bad boy who who's the local bad boy who is known for having run-ins with the law. He's kind of a troublemaker. But the thing is, while he is kind of the town's bad boy, they they wrote that part. They wrote him. They wrote him in such a way that he definitely does fit the bad boy character type they set up for him. And there are scenes where he is kind of a dick, but they never make him but they never make him so much but he is never so much of an asshole that you want to see the Blob get him. For example, there is a scene where at the start of the film, well, the movie opens with the town kind of looking all empty and deserted, only for the reason, only for the reason for that. Um, it starts up, you see the town, it's deserted. It kind of lets you think, ooh, this town is empty and abandoned, something bad must have happened. But no, the reason for the town being completely empty at the start of the film is quite humorously and realistically given, as the entire town is at a football game, which I really like because also this movie does also the remake does have its funny moments because Paul's friend Scott well actually no I'll get to that later, but the remake Brian is attempting to do a jump on his Triumph motorcycle, and as he is like and as he is driving towards the jump on his bike, it is cutting back to the crowd at the football game chanting, "Go! Go!" Which is pretty funny. Um, of course, when he passes the point of no return, his bike craps out and he goes off and he wipes out. And the homeless guy who later, and the homeless guy who later finds the Blob, he watches the whole thing and he just kind of clapping out like, yeah, yeah, and flag. He doesn't like shout at the guy, tell him to like fuck off or anything. He just he doesn't he doesn't like beat up the homeless guy. He just kind of laugh like, yeah, that was a pretty bad wipeout. But yeah. So that's the thing. I mean, they make this guy. They make he's so the character of Brian is he's easily my favorite character. He's a dick, but he's a very likable dick. And now the remake of the Blob does have its funny moments because as I was saying earlier, Paul's friend and Scott, they find themselves at a pharmacy, and Paul doesn't want to be caught buying condoms, so he gets his friend Scott Jeske to do it, and and which is also kind of funny because he tells the pharmacist, "Hey, could I get some condoms, please?" And the pharmacist goes around back, and the minister and the town's local minister is like talking to Scott about the game, and he's like, "Haven't seen you at the Sunday services recently," and he's like, "Oh, I've been busy with stuff." And then the pharmacist walks up to the counter holding two different condoms, and he's like, regular and ribbed, and the reverend is like, which is really funny. But then, of course, he spins this whole story like he's buying them for his friend Paul, and Paul's completely irresponsible, and he thinks the girl he's gonna be seeing is a dimwit. And of course, the pharmacist does not like Paul, thanks to what Scott says. And then Paul goes to pick up his day, and his day is like, "Let me introduce you to my dad." And his dad's the pharmacist, which I thought was like which was really funny. Which I mean, yeah, and but yeah, and Johnny Smith, she is just like, first of all the actors, all the acting in the film is really good, and in fact, one actor you might spot is the guy playing the sheriff's deputy, Briggs is played by the same guy that played Emil in RoboCop. Emil was the guy that crashes the van into the toxic waste, and it got melted. And he's like walking around, and he goes to that guy, he's like, hey, me, and the guy like, ah! Like that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, Emil from RoboCop is in this movie, which is really, really cool. Now, this movie's special effects. Now, okay. Now, if there's anything that the Blob remake, now, if there's anything that the remake holds over the original from the 50s, it's that the effects in the remake are, are vastly better, but you can't really count that because number, but you can't really count that because number one, because, number one, the remake was made 30 years after the original, so of course there's like 30 years worth of advances in special effects. Plus, the original Blob had a budget of either 110,000 or 240,000, depending on who you ask. But the remake has a budget of 19 million. So 30 years worth of advances in the field of special effects, and plus a budget like over 50 times higher. I mean, yeah, of course, the newer one's gonna have better effects, but but with 30 years of advances in the field of special effects, those 30 years also marked the demise of the Hays Code, which was a code that introduced in 34, saying you couldn't show sex, you couldn't have a bad guy get away with a crime, you couldn't show violence. It was just basically, it was incredibly assertive and severely restrictive. And by the 60s, the Hays people were like, you know what? That stupid code people put in place 30 years ago, screw that, we'll put all the blood and tits and films we want. And so the remake of the Blob is very gory. It's very violent. But of course, since the Blob basically consumed its prey and digests them, which is only hinted at the original. I mean, you don't see people get melted. The Blob starts off as like white, and then as it gets bigger, it gets red from the blood of its victims, and it's heavily implied that's how it's disposed of. In the remake, it is not implied. They show everything. Like a guy, like the Blob falls on someone from the ceiling, and you see him like melting him. Someone grabs a hold of his arm, which is the only part of him not consumed by the Blob, and he ends up pulling the arm off, and you see the guy's like, you see the Blob melt the guy's muscles in the jaw, so his jaw's opening a lot more than it should, and his eyes melt out of his head. It is just, I mean, like, the 80s was a great decade for effects. I mean, there's also a scene where, like, the Blob, like, it hides itself inside a girl, and then when her boyfriend, like, attempts to cop a feel, it gets him. And, now my favorite, now I really enjoy this movie. I mean, it is easily, like, one of the best remakes of all time. But, aside from being incredibly violent, there's also a scene where certain people may not be able to see because, as is in the original, in the remake, there is a scene where the Blob attacks a movie theater, and the majority of this scene, while the light is flickering like so fast, it's basically they filmed that scene where the Blob is attacking people in the theater. It's just flashing there's a lot of like flashing lights, and it's really cool because you see the characters running. Like you see Meg and two boys running from the Blob, but because it keeps changing from bright to black multiple times per second, it makes it look like they're running in slow motion. And so yeah, that scene does contain a lot of strobing effects, which if you have epilepsy, you may want to fast forward through it, because when I was like rewinding it, because I like that scene so much, I was watching it over and over again. When you're rewinding it, at least on a cassette tape, um, it kind of splits because there's a small part at the top where there is light, a small section at the bottom, a small section below that, small section at the top is light, small one below that dark, below that huge space of light, below that huge space of dark. But I mean, it's a very good and suspenseful scene. I mean, like they do change a major thing about the Blob, but I'm not going to specify that because, as I said, I don't want to spoil this for you. But this movie is just, I mean, like this movie's writing, as best as I can say, everything else I've said about the writing, this is the only thing I can say that won't spoil it. This movie is, it's deceptively written. That's all I can say. And, yeah. Now, this copy of the Blob, well, this print of it, well, actually, no, this copy, it's not in the best shape. As you can see, it's got a sticker covering part of the title, and the top flap is missing, but what can you do? Anyways, yeah. So, yeah, I highly recommend this remake. In fact, if what I've said about the film hadn't sold you on it, this film's screenplay was written by two people. Person number one is Chuck Russell, who you may not know about, but the screenplay's second writer is the same man that made season 1 of The Walking Dead so great, Frank Darabont. Yeah, Frank Darabont. Now, this I love this movie. It's easily one of my favorite remakes. Well, not just my favorite remake. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Highly recommended. 5 stars. Check it out. Thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you all soon in the near future. Peace.